Before we start, wherever you are right now, whatever room, whatever hour of the night it is, just take one breath. That's all. One slow one. Now, if something's sitting heavy on your chest tonight, a worry, a name, a decision you can't stop turning over, drop it in the comments. You don't have to explain it. Just set it down. You'd be surprised how many people reading those words at 3 in the morning will know exactly what you mean. Where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Tell me. I like knowing who's out there. And if this is your first time here, stay a while. Subscribe if it feels right. We do this every week and there's always room. Now close your eyes. We're going back. Way back. 40,000 years. Swallow. Just once right now. Feel the muscles in your throat pull and release. That small, involuntary motion, you share it with every human who has ever lived. The woman who nursed her infant in a rock shelter while rain hammered the limestone above her. The man who swallowed smoke and river water and kept walking south because something in his gut said south. The child who ate a handful of crushed berries 40,000 years ago and tasted the same sweetness you taste when you bite into a ripe strawberry today. Your throat. Their throat. Same machinery. Same ancient software running on the same ancient hardware. Tonight, we're not going to talk about kings or empires or wars with names you had to memorize for a test. We're going to talk about a Tuesday. An ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday. 40,000 years before anyone invented Tuesdays. Here is something strange that most people never hear. For roughly 97% of our species' existence, there was no farming, no cities, no writing, no money, no rent, no deadlines, no alarm clocks, no taxes, no traffic. For almost 300,000 years, human beings, people with your exact brain, your exact capacity for love and boredom and clever problem solving, lived without any of it. And here's the strange part. They weren't miserable. The anthropological evidence, the bones, the teeth, the wear patterns on ancient tools, the residue left on cooking stones, tells a story that doesn't match the picture most of us carry in our heads. These weren't desperate cave dwellers huddled in the dark, flinching at every sound. Their skeletons show fewer signs of chronic stress than yours probably would. Their teeth, in many populations, were healthier than the teeth of medieval Europeans who came 200 centuries later. They had more leisure time than you do. Not slightly more. Significantly more. Modern hunter-gatherer societies, the closest living mirror we have to that deep past, typically work somewhere between 4 and 6 hours a day to meet their needs. The rest is conversation, rest, play, storytelling, grooming, sex, and staring at fire. The anthropologist Marshall Solins called them the original affluent society. Not because they had many things, but because they wanted few things. And the distance between having and wanting was almost nothing. You, on the other hand, you reading this at midnight with your jaw clenched and your shoulders up near your ears, you live in the most materially abundant civilization in the history of the species. And you're exhausted. That gap, between their simplicity and your complexity, between their rest and your restlessness, is what tonight is about. A fire crackles somewhere. You can almost smell the smoke. Pine resin and something animal beneath it, like fat dripping on hot stone. Let's stay here a moment. Listen. You don't have to stay awake for any of this. If your eyes are getting heavy, let them close. If you drift off somewhere between the second paragraph and the fifth, that's fine. That's good even. The words will still be here in the morning. The story doesn't need you to take notes. Right now, someone in Sao Paulo is listening to this. Someone in a small town in Norway. Someone on a night shift in a hospital in Seoul, earbuds in, trying to feel something quieter than the fluorescent lights above them. You're not alone in this, even if the room you're in is empty. Stay if you want. Sleep if you need to. Either way, you're welcome here. Now let's step through the door. 40,000 years ago. somewhere in what will one day be called southern France, though it will not be called anything for a very long time. The air smells like frost. Not the clean, sharp frost you know from a winter morning in a parking lot. This is a frost that has settled into limestone and moss and the damp fur of animals and the breath of a river that hasn't been named and will never be dammed. It smells like cold iron and wet stone and something faintly sweet, like rotting leaves compressed under ice. The ground is hard beneath bare feet, or feet wrapped in hide, stitched clumsily with sinew, the seams already pulling apart because the woman who made them was in a hurry and the awl was dull. You can feel the unevenness of the earth through the leather. A buried root. A stone the size of a fist. The texture of the world pressing upward against the sole of the foot, and the foot pressing back, and the body above it adjusting with each step in a constant, unconscious negotiation with gravity that your body still performs every time you walk across a room. This is the Upper Paleolithic. The ice sheets are enormous. They stretch across northern Europe like a white hand pressing down on the land. But here in the south, in the river valleys that cut through limestone plateaus, life is not frozen. It is cold, yes, bitter some mornings, but the valleys are sheltered. The rivers are full of salmon and trout. The hillsides are thick with herds, reindeer, horse, bison, aurochs, animals so abundant that the ground itself seems to move when you look at it from a ridge. And here, in a shallow overhang of rock above a bend in the river, not really a cave, more of a stone awning, a natural porch, a small group of people is waking up. The smell hits first. Wood smoke, dense and layered, oak and birch, burned down to coals overnight, a few last ribbons of smoke rising from the ash. Beneath that, animal hide. The musk of it. Furs piled on furs. The body heat of 8 or 9 people trapped under skins that still carry the faint scent of the deer they came from. And beneath even that, the human smell. Sweat, breath, the oils of hair and skin, the warm yeast and iron scent of people who sleep close together because closeness is warmth and warmth is survival. Someone coughs. A child stirs, mumbles something, and presses closer to the body beside her. Outside the overhang, the sound of the river. Not a roar, this is winter and the water is low, but a steady, cold murmur over stones. And birds. The first birds of a pale dawn. A blackbird maybe. A song thrush. A sound so ordinary, so ancient, that if you recorded it and played it in your living room right now, your nervous system would not know the difference between that morning and this one. The same frequency. The same rhythm. Your brain is tuned to it. Birdsong at dawn triggers a drop in cortisol that no pharmaceutical company has ever been able to replicate. The first person to rise is a woman. She's somewhere between 30 and 35, though the concept of numerical age doesn't exist yet. Her body knows how old it is without counting. Her knees ache when the cold is bad. A molar on the left side throbs sometimes. She had 4 children and 3 of them are alive, and her body carries each pregnancy in the looseness of her belly and the particular way her hips move when she walks. She steps out from under the overhang and the cold hits her face. Not gently. It's the kind of cold that makes the inside of your nostrils stick together for a moment when you inhale. She pulls a fur tighter around her shoulders. It's bison heavy, the leather side out, the fur side in against her skin. The weight of it is real. Not decorative. This is insulation engineered by evolution and prepared by hands that know the specific pressure needed to scrape fat from the underside of a hide without puncturing it. She looks out at the valley. The river is a dull silver in the pre-dawn light. The far bank is a dark line of alder and willow. Beyond that, the hills rise in layers, each one paler than the last, fading into a sky that is not yet blue but is no longer black. Somewhere out there, on the open grassland beyond the tree line, a herd of reindeer is moving. She can't see them. But she knows they're there because the wind, when it shifts, carries their smell, a thick, musky, grassy scent like lanolin and damp earth. She knows this landscape the way you know your apartment. Not from a map. From her feet. From 10,000 walks along the same river, up the same ridge, through the same stand of birch trees where the mushrooms grow in autumn and the hazelnuts drop in late summer. She carries a mental map of this territory that is staggeringly detailed. Where water pools after rain, where flint outcrops from the chalk, where a particular kind of clay can be dug that makes the best adhesive when mixed with pine resin and beeswax. This knowledge was not taught in a classroom. It was absorbed, walked into her bones over years of watching, following, tasting, smelling, failing, and trying again. The same calcium that stiffened theite walls of the shelter she just slept in is in her teeth, in her bones. It's in your teeth right now. The same element. The same ancient mineral cycling through bodies and rocks and rivers in a loop so old it makes human history look like a single breath. She doesn't think about this, of course. She thinks about fire. The coals need feeding. There are fish traps in the river that need checking. One of the children had a cough last night, a wet, rattling cough that she didn't like the sound of. She reaches down and picks up a stick, pushes it into the coals, waits. A thread of smoke rises, then a glow. Then, with a soft exhale of breath blown through pursed lips, the same lips, the same breath, the same physics of combustion that you use when you blow on a birthday candle, the fire catches. The warmth reaches her hands first, then her face. She leans into it the way you lean into a hot shower after a cold day, and for a moment, just a moment, the world is reduced to this. The heat of the fire on her skin, the sound of the river behind her, the slow stirring of the people she loves under their furs. No bills, no inbox, no notifications, no news cycle telling her the world is ending. Just the fire, just the river. Just the ordinary radical act of being alive on a cold morning in a world that is exactly as large as she can walk. The coals hiss as moisture escapes from the new wood. A small pop like a knuckle cracking. The fire settles into its work. And the day, an ordinary day 40,000 years deep, begins. Behind her, a man sits up. He doesn't speak yet. Morning speech is a modern habit. The compulsion to narrate, to plan aloud, to fill silence with language before the body is ready for it. He just sits, listens, reads the morning the way you might read a text message, except his screen is the entire valley. The pitch of the birdsong tells him something about the temperature. The direction of the smoke tells him about the wind, which tells him about the weather, which tells him whether this is a day for hunting on the open steppe or a day for staying close to the river. He stretches. His shoulders pop, the same sound yours make when you've slept in a strange position. He is lean, ropey, with the kind of musculature that comes not from repetitive exercise but from a life that demands a different movement every hour. Climbing, carrying, throwing, digging, squatting, walking, always walking. His body is not specialized. It is general. It is the body of a generalist, which is what a human being is. The most generalized animal on Earth, the Swiss Army knife of the primate world, mediocre at everything and therefore capable of anything. He reaches for a water skin, a bladder made from the stomach of a deer, tied at the neck with sinew, the seam sealed with pine pitch. The water inside is cold. River water, collected yesterday, slightly silty, faintly mineral. It tastes like the earth it came from. Not filtered. Not treated. Just water, carrying the dissolved memory of every rock it has touched on its way downhill. You can almost taste it if you let yourself. That cold, clean, slightly metallic taste. Your body knows it. Every cell in you was built by water like this. The children are awake now. 3 of them, ranging in age from maybe 4 to maybe 11, though, again, no one is counting. The youngest crawls across the furs toward the fire with the focused determination of a child who has learned that fire equals warmth equals comfort. She already understands this, not as a concept, as a feeling in her bones. Warmth is safety, cold is danger. This is the oldest lesson the species has, and she learned it without a single word being spoken. The older boy is already on his feet, pulling on his hide wraps, tying them with the practiced speed of someone who has done this every morning of his life. He is watching the man, his father, or perhaps his uncle, or perhaps someone whose relationship to him has no word in any language you speak, because kinship in this world is a web, not a tree. He is watching and learning and filing away every gesture, every glance at the sky, every reading of the wind, because this is school. This is the classroom. The entire landscape is the curriculum, and every adult is a teacher, and the final exam is whether you survive long enough to teach someone else. There is a sound from down by the river. A splash. Not a fish, too heavy for a fish. Something drinking. The man tilts his head. Listens. The woman, still crouching by the fire, listens too. For a moment, the entire camp is frozen in that posture of attention. The oldest posture, the one your body still snaps into when you hear an unexpected noise in your house at night. Head tilted, breath held, ears wide open, then a grunt, low guttural. The woman relaxes. She knows that sound. It's an aurochs, a wild ox, massive, the ancestor of every domestic cow that will ever live. It's just drinking. It's not a threat. Not now, anyway. The tension leaves the camp the way tension leaves your shoulders when you realize the sound downstairs was just the cat. A collective exhale. A return to the small tasks of morning. And this reading of sound, this constant listening, this body poised between rest and response, is the baseline state of a human nervous system. Not fight or flight. Not the chronic low-grade alarm that buzzes in your chest when you check your phone and see 14 unread emails. Something more balanced, more animal. A state of alert calm that your body remembers how to do, even if your life never gives it the chance. Feel your own shoulders right now. Are they tense? Probably. That tension is your body doing something it was designed to do, listening for the aurochs, but doing it in response to an inbox. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a predator and a deadline. It responds to both with the same ancient chemistry. Cortisol, adrenaline, glucose flooding into the muscles. The difference is that the aurochs goes away. It drinks and leaves. The deadline doesn't. The inbox refills. The alarm never fully shuts off. But right now, tonight in this story, there is no inbox. There is only the river, the fire, the cold morning air, and the slow waking of a small group of people who have everything they need within arm's reach. The fire pops again. A spark rises and dies in the cold air. The woman feeds it another branch, birch this time, the bark curling and catching fast, throwing a brief yellow light across the stone overhang. Somewhere a wolf howls. Distant. Miles away maybe. The sound rolls down the valley like fog, thin and stretched and ancient, and it means nothing alarming. Wolves are neighbors here, not enemies. The relationship between wolves and humans at this point in history is complex, cautious, occasionally cooperative. Some researchers believe this is the period when the first tentative steps toward domestication began. Not through capture, not through breeding programs, but through a slow, mutual decision to tolerate each other's presence near the fire. But that is a story for another night. For now, the wolf's howl fades into the sound of the river, and the river fades into the crackle of the fire, and the fire fades into the murmur of voices as the camp comes fully awake and the first decisions of the day are made, not by a leader, not by a vote, but by a quiet consensus that moves through the group like a current. Someone picks up a spear. Someone wraps a bundle of dried fish in a square of hide. Someone checks the cough of the smallest child and presses the back of a hand, warm from the fire, against the child's forehead. The day is here. and it will be, by any measure you care to apply, a good one. In 1868, workers blasting a railway line through a limestone cliff in the Dordogne region of France broke into something they didn't expect. Behind the rock face, a shallow overhang. And inside that overhang, bones. Not animal bones. Human bones. 5 skeletons, curled and compressed by millennia of sediment, their eye sockets packed with red earth, their skulls fractured by the weight of time. The workers stopped. Someone sent for a geologist. The geologist looked at the bones, looked at the stratigraphy of the rock around them, and understood that these were not recent dead. These were old. Impossibly old. They named the site Cro-Magnon, after the rock shelter where the bones were found. And for a long time that name, Cro-Magnon, became a shorthand for something most people misunderstood. It conjured images of brutes. Thick-browed, slack-jawed, stooped, grunting. Cavemen in the cartoon sense. The bones told a different story entirely. The skeletons were tall. The men stood around 5 feet 10, taller than the average European male well into the 19th century. Their bones were dense, heavy with mineral, the bones of people who carried loads and walked distances that would hospitalize most modern athletes. But they were not crude. The joints were clean. The muscle attachment points were symmetrical, balanced. These were bodies that moved well. Bodies that knew how to run, climb, throw, swim, squat for hours, and sleep on stone and wake up ready to do it again. And the skulls. This is where it gets quiet and strange and worth sitting with for a moment. The cranial capacity of these individuals, the sheer volume of brain inside those skulls, was, on average, slightly larger than yours. Not smaller. Larger. By about 10%. The same brain architecture. The same frontal lobes, the same Broca's area for language, the same prefrontal cortex for planning and imagining the future. Every structure you use to read these words, to feel emotion, to lie awake at 3 in the morning worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, they had it. All of it. Fully developed. Fully operational. The wind picks up outside whatever room you're in. Or maybe it doesn't. But imagine it does. A cold gust carrying the smell of wet stone and old earth, the smell of a dig site at dawn. In a laboratory in Leipzig, Germany, the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, a different kind of excavation happens. No shovels here. No brushes. Instead, clean rooms with positive air pressure, where the air flows outward to keep modern DNA from contaminating ancient samples. Researchers wear full-body suits, face masks, double gloves. They handle bone fragments the size of a fingernail with forceps under magnification, and every surface is bathed in ultraviolet light to destroy stray genetic material. This is where ancient DNA is extracted, and the process is almost absurdly delicate. A fragment of bone, sometimes from the inner ear, the petrous bone, which is the densest bone in the human body and therefore the best vault for preserving DNA, is drilled with a tiny bit. The powder that comes off is dissolved in a chemical buffer. The DNA that survives, after 40,000 years of degradation, exists in fragments so short they make a shattered mirror look intact. 50 base pairs. 30. Sometimes fewer. Each one a torn scrap of a book that was once 3 billion letters long. But the machines can read those scraps. And when enough scraps are assembled, sequenced, aligned, and compared, a picture emerges. The picture says this: the people who lived in that rock shelter in the Dordogne were you. Not metaphorically. Genetically. If you are of European descent, somewhere between 2 and 4% of your DNA came directly from Neanderthals, from interbreeding events that happened right around this period 40 to 60,000 years ago. The rest came from populations that looked, thought, loved, grieved, and dreamed in ways that would be indistinguishable from the way you do those things tonight. Your DNA is a document. And part of it was written by firelight in a river valley in the cold. There is another kind of evidence, quieter in some ways than bones or genes. In Greenland and Antarctica, drilling teams have extracted cores of ice that reach back hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer, each annual snowfall compressed into a thin band of ice, is a record. The ratio of oxygen isotopes in the ice tells researchers the temperature of the air when that snow fell. Trapped air bubbles preserve the actual atmosphere of the past, the concentration of carbon dioxide, methane, dust. You can hold a cylinder of ice from a Greenland core and you are holding a cross-section of the sky from 40,000 years ago. The air inside those bubbles is the air they breathed. And what the ice says about this period is this: it was cold, but it was not uniformly cold. The climate of the Upper Paleolithic was volatile. It swung. Warm spells followed by rapid cooling. Decades of relative mildness interrupted by centuries of deep freeze. The ice sheets advanced and retreated like a tide measured in millennia. And the people living through it, our people, the people in the rock shelter, had no way of knowing whether the warmth they were experiencing was permanent or a brief reprieve. They adapted anyway. They adapted every single time. But the ice is not the only clock. There are teeth. Teeth are extraordinary archives. The enamel of a human tooth forms in layers like tree rings, and those layers lock in the chemical signature of whatever the person was eating and drinking during the years the tooth was forming. Strontium isotope ratios can tell a researcher where a person grew up, which geological region, which type of bedrock, which watershed. Carbon isotopes reveal diet, how much meat versus plant material, how much freshwater fish versus terrestrial game. Nitrogen isotopes indicate trophic level, where a person sat on the food chain. And when you run these analyses on teeth from 40,000-year-old burials, you find something remarkable. These people were not stuck. They moved. Some individuals show strontium signatures from multiple geological zones, meaning they traveled, not aimlessly but across established routes, between known territories, across landscapes they understood with an intimacy that modern cartography can only approximate. They were also eating well. The isotope profiles suggest varied, protein-rich diets, large herbivores supplemented with fish, small game, tubers, seeds, nuts, fungi. Not the diet of desperation. The diet of knowledge. They knew what to eat, when to eat it, and where to find it, because this information had been transmitted across generations by the oldest technology humans possess. Talking to each other. A tooth from a burial in the Czech Republic. A tooth from a rock shelter in the Dordogne. A tooth from a cave in the Swabian Jura. Each one a tiny time capsule, carrying the chemical ghost of meals eaten by firelight, under stars that have since shifted in the sky. Your own teeth are recording your life right now. The coffee you drank this morning. The water in your city. The minerals in your food. 40,000 years from now, if someone found your jaw in the sediment, they could read you like a book. The fire in the story crackles. A log shifts, sending a constellation of sparks upward into the dark. Hold that image. Here is one way to understand what was happening to our species 40,000 years ago. It requires patience and a single comparison held steady in the mind. Think of a river. Not a river on a map. A real river. One you've seen or stood beside or crossed. Think of the sound it makes. The way it moves. Now imagine that river running through a narrow gorge, the walls of rock pressing in on both sides, the current forced into a tight channel. In that gorge, the water moves fast. It's loud. It's concentrated. Every drop is going in the same direction because there is no other direction available. Now imagine the river emerging from the gorge into an open plain. The walls fall away. The current slows. The water spreads. It branches into tributaries, meanders, oxbow lakes, marshes, floodplains. It finds 100 paths where before there was only one. And along each of those new paths, different things grow. Different ecosystems. Different possibilities. This is what happened to Homo sapiens between roughly 60,000 and 30,000 years ago. And the gorge in this analogy was Africa. Not because Africa was small, Africa is enormous. But because for most of our species' early history, the population was small. Genetically, behaviorally, technologically, the river of humanity was narrow. The tools changed slowly. The territory expanded slowly. The range of cultural expression, as far as the archaeological record can show, was relatively constrained. Estimates vary, but the total global population of Homo sapiens 100,000 years ago may have been as low as 10,000 breeding individuals. 10,000. Fewer people than attend a minor league baseball game. The entire species scattered across the African continent in small bands, connected by kinship and trade routes and shared language families that branched and diverged like rivers. And within that small population, genetic diversity was already staggering. This is a point that often surprises people. The greatest genetic diversity on Earth today is found not between continents, not between races, but within Africa. Every non-African population on the planet is a subset, a branch, a narrowing of the vast genetic reservoir that existed, and still exists, on the African continent. The river was narrow in numbers, but it was deep in variation. Deep enough to produce everything that came after. Then something shifted. The river hit the plain. Between 60 and 40,000 years ago, a series of migrations carried modern humans out of Africa and into the rest of the world. Not all at once. Not in a single wave. The genetic evidence suggests multiple departures, some of which dead-ended, some of which merged with earlier populations already outside Africa. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in Eastern Asia and Oceania. The river branched and branched again. And as it branched, it accelerated. This is the period archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, though revolution is a misleading word because it implies a single event, a switch thrown, a before and after. It wasn't like that. It was more like a slow boil that, from a distance of 40 millennia, looks sudden. The evidence for the acceleration is everywhere. Stone tools, which had been refined slowly over hundreds of thousands of years, suddenly, in archaeological terms, exploded in diversity. Blades became thinner, longer, more specialized. Tools made of bone and antler appeared for the first time. Needles. Actual sewing needles with eyes, carved from bone so fine you could thread sinew through them. This matters more than it sounds like it matters. A needle means fitted clothing. Fitted clothing means better insulation. Better insulation means the ability to survive in colder climates. A tiny splinter of carved bone opened an entire continent. The river spread further. Personal ornaments appeared. Beads made from shells, from animal teeth, from ostrich eggshell, drilled with stone points, strung on cords of plant fiber or sinew, and worn against the skin. These are not tools. You cannot cut meat with a shell bead. You cannot scrape a hide with a fox-tooth pendant. These objects exist for one reason only, to mean something. To signal identity, status, group membership, beauty, grief, love. They are symbols. And a species that uses symbols is a species that has crossed a threshold that no other animal has crossed before or since. Think about that for a moment. A fox tooth, drilled through the root, hanging from a cord around someone's neck. It serves no survival function. It does not keep you warm. It does not fill your stomach. It does not protect you from predators. It exists because the person wearing it wanted other people to see it and understand something about who they were. It exists because of vanity or mourning or belonging or love, And every one of those motivations is still driving you to choose what you wear, what you post, what you display on your shelf or your wall or your skin. 40,000 years and we still adorn ourselves to be seen. We still hang symbols around our necks and hope someone understands what they mean. The river didn't just spread, it deepened. And then there is the art. The paintings in Chauvet. The carvings at Whole Fells. The lion-headed figurine from Stadel Cave. A small sculpture carved from mammoth ivory, depicting a being that is half human and half cave lion. An animal that does not exist. An animal that has never existed. Which means the person who carved it was not recording what they saw. They were imagining what they had never seen. They were holding two categories, human and lion, in their minds simultaneously, infusing them into a third thing, a new thing, a thing that existed nowhere in the physical world. That is abstraction. That is metaphor. That is the same cognitive operation you perform when you understand a poem, when you laugh at a joke, when you dream. The figurine is small enough to fit in your palm. It was carved with flint tools, probably over many days. The ivory is hard, resistant, unforgiving of mistakes. Someone sat by a fire, turning a piece of mammoth tusk in their hands, and slowly, carefully, with a kind of patience that only deep intention produces, carved an impossible creature into being. They must have seen it in their mind before they began. They must have carried the image, the lion's head on the human shoulders, inside their skull, the way you carry a melody or a face or a worry, and then they made it real. We don't know why. We don't know if it was religious, decorative, therapeutic, playful, or something we have no word for. We only know it was made, and that the making of it required every cognitive capacity you possess. Imagination, planning, fine motor control, abstract thought, and the stubborn belief that something invisible is worth making visible. The figurine sat in the dark of that cave for 40,000 years. When it was found in 1939, it was in fragments. It took decades to piece it back together. And when it was finally assembled, when the lion's head emerged from the puzzle of broken ivory, the researchers who held it reportedly fell silent. Some things do not need explanation. They need only to be witnessed. The river had become an ocean. And you, lying here tonight, your breath slowing, your thoughts beginning to soften at the edges, you are a drop in that ocean. The same water. The same current. The same ancient momentum carrying you forward from a gorge in Africa to wherever you are right now. Feel that current for a moment. It's in your blood. Literally. The hemoglobin in your red blood cells contains iron atoms that were forged in a star that died before the Earth was born. But more recently, more personally, the specific arrangement of your DNA, the specific configuration of your neurons, the particular way your mind wanders when you're falling asleep, all of it was shaped by that moment of branching, that emergence onto the open plain, that explosion of possibility that happened 40,000 years ago. You are the river on the plain. You are the water that found a new path. A long breath. The fire has burned lower. The coals glow like a field of tiny orange suns, pulsing with heat. Now here is where honesty requires us to slow down, sit with what we don't know, and resist the temptation to tell a clean story. Because the story I just told you, the river, the gorge, the sudden flowering, is a story. It's a useful one. It's supported by evidence. But it is also, in important ways, incomplete. And some of the people who have spent their entire careers studying this period will tell you, quietly over a beer at a conference, that the neat narrative of a revolution may be more about us than about them. The problem is the record. The archaeological record is not a complete library. It is a library that has been burned, flooded, buried, scattered by earthquakes, consumed by bacteria, and then partially reconstructed by people working with tweezers and headlamps in muddy trenches. What survives is not a representative sample of what existed. It is a wildly biased sample, skewed by the accidents of preservation. Stone survives. Bone sometimes survives depending on soil chemistry. Wood almost never survives. Leather doesn't survive. Woven fiber doesn't survive. Anything made of plant material, baskets, cordage, nets, traps, clothing, shelters, medicines, is gone. Vanished, as if it never existed. And here is why this matters. If you judge a culture only by what was made of stone and bone, you will inevitably underestimate it. You will miss the sophistication of the perishable technologies, the ones made from the soft, organic, biodegradable materials that constituted, in all likelihood, the vast majority of material culture. We know from the few rare exceptions, waterlogged sites, frozen sites, sites sealed in anaerobic clay, that Upper Paleolithic people made cordage, wove baskets, constructed elaborate traps, and used plant-based adhesives of startling chemical complexity. We know this from the exceptions. What we don't know is everything the exceptions don't preserve. At the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, researchers found impressions of woven textiles pressed into fired clay fragments. The clay had hardened around the fibers before they decayed, preserving a negative image, a ghost, of the weave. The patterns were not random. They showed different weaving techniques: plain weave, twining, knotting. This is not the work of people fumbling with string for the first time. This is textile technology. Refined, varied, practiced. And it dates to roughly 26,000 years ago, though similar techniques almost certainly existed much earlier, leaving no trace. Imagine all the baskets, all the nets, all the snares and fishing lines and baby slings and medicine pouches and binding wraps and cord-lashed shelters. Imagine the entire soft infrastructure of daily life, and then imagine it vanishing completely as if it had never been made. That is the gap in the record. That is the silence we're listening through. So when we say the Upper Paleolithic saw a revolution in human behavior, when we point to the sudden appearance of art and ornament and complex tools, we need to pause. Because it's possible that much of this behavior existed earlier in Africa, in forms we cannot see because they were made of materials that rotted away in tropical heat. The revolution may not be a revolution in behavior at all. It may be a revolution in preservation. A quirk of climate and geology that made European cave sites into natural time capsules, while African open-air sites were erased by rain and sun and microbial life. This is not a fringe argument. This is a serious, ongoing debate among paleoanthropologists, and it reshapes the story in ways that matter. Consider the oldest known beads in the world. They are not from Europe. They are from Blombos Cave in South Africa, and they are roughly 75,000 years old, 35,000 years older than the European Upper Paleolithic. They are made from nacreous shells, carefully perforated, and some still bear traces of red ochre, a pigment that has no functional purpose on a shell bead. It is decoration. It is meaning. It is symbolic behavior in Africa, tens of thousands of years before the European Revolution supposedly began. And at the same site, Blombos, researchers found engraved blocks of ochre. Geometric patterns scratched into the flat surface of the stone with a pointed tool. Cross-hatching. Parallel lines. Abstract design. 75,000 years ago. In Africa. The river, it turns out, may have been wider than we thought, long before it left the gorge. And it's not just Blombos. At Pinnacle Point, also in South Africa, there is evidence that humans were heat-treating stone tools, deliberately applying fire to silkcrete to change its fracture properties, making it easier to nap into fine blades, as early as 164,000 years ago. That is not a simple behavior. That is engineering. It requires understanding that fire, applied at the right temperature for the right duration, alters the molecular structure of stone in a way that makes it more useful. It requires foresight, experimentation, and the ability to transmit a recipe across generations. At Border Cave in South Africa, researchers found a thin stick with traces of a complex adhesive, a mixture of plant gum and red ochre, carefully prepared and applied. Dated to roughly 70,000 years ago. Someone in that cave understood chemistry. Not the word, not the periodic table, but the relationships between substances, the way things bind and separate and transform when combined. All of this happened in Africa, tens of thousands of years before the European record begins to shine. Your body shifts in the dark. A muscle in your leg twitches, that old involuntary jerk that sometimes happens when you're on the edge of sleep. It's called a hypnic jerk, and no one fully understands why it happens. One theory is that it's a relic from our arboreal past. The sleeping primate's body mistaking the relaxation of muscles for the sensation of falling from a branch. A ghost of a tree you never climbed, firing through your nervous system 40,000 generations later. Even your involuntary movements are ancestral. Even your twitches have history. So where does this leave us? With a picture that is richer and more honest than the simple narrative, but also more uncertain. What we can say with confidence is this. By 40,000 years ago, fully modern human beings, people with your cognitive architecture, your emotional range, your capacity for language and art and abstract thought, were living across a vast stretch of the old world. They were in Africa, where they had been for hundreds of thousands of years. They were in Europe, where they had recently arrived and were sharing the landscape with the last Neanderthals. They were in Asia and Australia, on islands they had reached by crossing open ocean on rafts or boats. A feat that requires planning, communication, and a willingness to set out toward a horizon with no guarantee of what lies beyond it. They were everywhere. And they were, in every measurable way, us. But the details, the dailiness of their lives, the texture of their mornings, the content of their conversations, the stories they told their children by the fire, these remain largely invisible. We infer them. We reconstruct them. We build careful models from bone chemistry and pollen analysis and isotope ratios and the wear patterns on stone tools. And those models are good. They are the best we can do. But they are models, not memories. Approximations, not recordings. The honest truth is that we know enough to be astonished and not enough to be certain. And maybe that's the right place to be. Maybe certainty would flatten the story, make it too neat, too resolved, too much like a textbook and not enough like a life. Lives are messy. Lives have gaps. The life of a woman, waking by a fire in the Dordogne 40,000 years ago, had as many unanswered questions in it as yours does tonight. She didn't know everything either, but she knew enough. Enough to keep the fire going. Enough to check the traps. Enough to press her hand against her child's forehead and feel for fever. And that knowledge, practical, embodied, inherited, and incomplete, was enough to carry the species forward through the cold and the dark and the long millennia that lay ahead. There is one more complication worth holding. One more wrinkle in the fabric. The Neanderthals. They were still alive at 40,000 years ago. Barely but alive. Scattered in pockets across southern Europe, Iberia, the Balkans, the Caucasus. The last remnants of a lineage that had thrived for 300,000 years. They had big brains. They buried their dead. They made tools. Some evidence, contested, debated, never fully settled, suggests they made art. Pigments. Eagle talons arranged in patterns that might be ornamental. Scratches on cave walls that might be intentional. They were not dumb. They were not lesser. They were a different answer to the same question. How does a large-brained primate survive in a cold, dangerous, unpredictable world? And they were disappearing. Within 5 to 10,000 years of sustained contact with modern humans, they would be gone. Not overnight. Not violently in most cases, though violence was surely part of it. Mostly they faded. Their population shrank. Their gene pool narrowed. They were absorbed, outcompete, marginalized, pressed into the edges of the habitable world until there were no edges left. But not entirely gone. That 2 to 4% of Neanderthal DNA in modern European and Asian populations means that somewhere, at some point, a modern human and a Neanderthal looked at each other across a campfire or a riverbank and saw not a monster, not an enemy, but a person. Someone worth touching. Someone worth the risk of closeness. That tenderness, that willingness to cross the boundary of the strange and find something recognizable on the other side, is also part of your inheritance. It is also written in your DNA, and it may be the most human thing about you. The fire has burned down to coals again. The light is low and orange and warm. Somewhere in the dark, the river keeps talking to the stones. Let it talk. There's more to hear. But not yet. Rest here for a moment first. Just breathe. Picture this. It is not yet dawn. The sky is a bruise, dark purple fading to gray at the eastern edge, the stars still holding on but losing their grip. The air is so cold it has a texture. It sits on the skin like a damp cloth, and when you breathe it in, you can feel it all the way down, the chill filling your chest, pressing against the inside of your ribs, turning your exhale into a small cloud that vanishes before it reaches your chin. You are lying on the ground. Not a mattress. Not a cot. The ground, but not bare ground. Beneath you is a layer of dried grass, then a layer of pine boughs whose needles have gone soft and flat with use, then a hide, deer, scraped thin on the flesh side, the fur still thick on the other. The fur is against your skin. It smells like the animal it came from, and beneath that, like smoke, because everything here smells like smoke. Smoke is the permanent background note of existence. It is in your hair, your skin, the furs you sleep in, the walls of the overhang above you. Smoke is not a nuisance. It is a companion. It means warmth. It means safety. It means home. Beside you, a body. Warm. The heat of another person pressed against your back, their breathing slow and heavy, their exhalation a faint rhythm on the back of your neck. You don't know this specific warmth because I've described it. You know it because you felt it. Everyone has. The particular comfort of another body beside yours in the dark, the way it turns a cold night into a tolerable one, the way it makes loneliness impossible even before the mind is awake enough to think the word. There are others nearby. You can hear them. Not their words, no one is speaking yet, but their sounds. The wet click of a swallow. A child's sigh. Someone shifting on their bedding, the furs rustling like dry leaves. A low murmur from the far side of the shelter, barely audible, might be a word or might be a sound made in sleep. The human orchestra of unconsciousness, playing the same concert it has played every night for 300,000 years. Then, birdsong. A single note. High, liquid, tentative. A robin, maybe, or something older than robins, some Pleistocene songbird whose descendants still carry the same melody in a throat the size of your thumbnail. The note hangs in the cold air for a moment, alone, and then another bird answers from somewhere down by the river, and then another, and within a few minutes the valley is filling with sound from the bottom up, like water rising in a bowl. This is the oldest alarm clock. And your body responds to it without your permission. Your heart rate increases slightly. Your blood pressure ticks upward. Cortisol, the hormone of waking, of readiness, of the day beginning, starts to flow. This is not stress. This is activation. The body preparing itself for the world, the way it has always prepared itself, triggered by the light frequency of pre-dawn and the frequency of birdsong, both of which are hard-coded into a part of your brain that is older than language, older than culture, older than art. Your body still does this. Even in a room with blackout curtains and a phone alarm set to a marimba tone, the ancient circuitry is still there, still listening for the robin, still waiting for the light to change. The woman from our story, the one with the aching molar and the 3 living children, she is already moving. She slept at the edge of the group, nearest the fire, because she is the one who tends it. Not by formal appointment. By habit. By the unspoken understanding that she wakes first, and the fire needs someone who wakes first. And so the two facts have merged into a role that doesn't have a title. She rises. The cold hits her arms and shoulders like a slap. She pulls a bison hide around herself. The weight of it is significant, maybe 15 pounds of tanned skin and dense winter fur, and crouches by the fire pit. The coals are low. Gray ash on top, but beneath it, when she pushes the ash aside with a stick, the faint orange glow of embers that have been breathing all night, slow and patient, consuming the last of the oak heartwood she fed them before sleep. She leans close, blows. The ash scatters and the glow brightens, and she places a bundle of dried grass on the embers and blows again, steady, controlled, her lips pursed, the breath aimed like a tool, because it is a tool. This is technology. This is fire management. And the skill required to keep a fire alive through a cold night, to read the state of coals by their color and heat, to know which wood burns fast and hot for cooking and which burns slow and steady for warmth. This skill is no less sophisticated than anything you learned in school. It is simply older. The grass catches. A thin tongue of flame. She feeds it, a twig, then a stick, then a split log of birch that she positioned within arm's reach before she slept, because preparation is the foundation of survival, and she has been preparing for mornings like this since she was old enough to watch her own mother do the same thing. The fire rises. Warmth pushes outward in a circle, and the world gets a little smaller, shrinking from the vast cold dark to the intimate warm glow of a fire that is, for this group of people, the center of everything. The sound of the flames. The pop of resin in the birch bark. The hiss of moisture escaping from the wood. These sounds are so deep in your auditory memory that recordings of campfires are now sold as sleep aids. You already know this. Your nervous system has been tuned to this sound for longer than it has been tuned to human speech. Close your eyes, or keep them closed if they're already shut, and just listen to the fire for a moment. It's not here, but your brain can build it. The crackle. The whisper. The occasional soft collapse of a burning log settling deeper into the coals. You know this sound. You've always known it. The camp stirs. It happens slowly, the way a pool of water clears after a stone is dropped into it, the disturbance spreading outward, then settling, then going still in a new configuration. One by one, bodies rise from the furs, stretching, coughing, reaching for water. A child whines, is gathered into someone's arms, and goes quiet against a warm chest. There is no rush, no schedule. No bell to answer, no clock to watch. The day will unfold according to the logic of need and season. What must be eaten, what must be repaired, what must be gathered before the weather turns. But the sequence is flexible. The timing is loose. There is a rhythm, but it is the rhythm of the body and the sun, not the rhythm of an institution. The first task is food. Not cooking, not yet. First, the traps. 2 men and the older boy, the one who watches everything, walk down to the river in the gray half-light. Their feet know the path. They could walk it blind. The ground is cold under their wrapped feet, cold enough that the mud along the riverbank has a thin crust of ice that cracks with each step, a sound like biting into a crisp apple. The fish traps are simple and brilliant, woven from willow branches, thin, flexible, bent into a funnel shape and staked into the riverbed at a point where the current narrows between 2 rocks. Fish swim in through the wide end, following the current, and cannot find their way back out through the narrow end. It is a design so effective that nearly identical traps are still used by indigenous fishing communities on 5 continents. The principle hasn't changed because the principle doesn't need to change. Water flows. Fish follow. The funnel catches. This morning, 2 trout. One is the length of a forearm, thick-bodied, cold sluggish, its scales dull silver in the early light. The boy carries it back to camp with both hands, the tail slapping against his thigh, and there is a quiet pride in the way he holds it, the way he presents it to the woman by the fire. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. She sees the fish. She nods. That nod contains a paragraph of meaning. Good, well done, you're learning, this will feed us. Back at the overhang, the fish are gutted with a flint blade. The motion is quick, practiced. A single cut from vent to gill, the entrails pulled free in one wet handful and set aside. Nothing is wasted. The guts will be used as bait or rendered for oil or fed to the camp's semi-tolerated canine companions, the wolves becoming dogs that hover at the edge of firelight, close enough to scavenge, far enough to bolt. The fish are laid on flat stones near the fire. Not directly on the coals, that would char the outside and leave the inside raw. On heated stones placed at the right distance, where the heat is steady and even. The woman knows this distance the way a baker knows the temperature of an oven. By feel, by the way the air moves against the back of her hand when she holds it above the stone. The smell of cooking fish fills the shelter. River sweet, oily, faintly mineral. Mixed with wood smoke, it becomes something that your brain would recognize instantly as food, as morning, as the promise that the day will be nourishing. While the fish cook, other work begins. An older man, perhaps 50, which is old here, old enough that his knowledge outweighs his diminishing physical power, sits cross-legged near the fire and works a piece of flint. He is napping. The process is hypnotic. He holds a nodule of flint in his left hand, padded with a piece of leather to protect his palm, and strikes it with a bone hammer, a cylinder of antler, smooth with use. Each strike sends a flake spinning off the core with a sharp, clean sound. Talk. Pause. Talk. Pause. The rhythm is steady, meditative, and the flakes that come off are not random. They are controlled. Each one is a blade, thin, sharp, uniform. The man is reading the stone the way a sculptor reads marble, finding the fracture planes hidden inside the flint and coaxing them free with precisely directed force. This is not mindless labor. Experimental archaeologists who have tried to replicate Upper Paleolithic blade production report that it takes hundreds of hours of practice to achieve consistent results. The napper must understand the conchoidal fracture properties of siliceous stone, must feel the vibration of each strike and adjust angle and force accordingly, must hold a mental model of the three-dimensional geometry inside an opaque rock. It is, by any honest measure, a form of engineering. The children watch. They always watch. The youngest sits in someone's lap, chewing on a piece of dried meat, jerky, essentially strips of venison dried over smoke until they are hard and dark and will last for weeks. Her jaw works steadily, her eyes on the flint napper's hands, absorbing the motion the way a child today absorbs the movements of a parent's fingers on a keyboard or a steering wheel. She doesn't know she's learning. She doesn't know she isn't. Feel your own jaw for a moment. The hinge of it, the temporomandibular joint just in front of your ear. Press it lightly. That joint is built for exactly this kind of sustained chewing, tough, fibrous food that requires real effort to break down. Your jaw is overqualified for the food you eat. It was built for the food she's eating. Meanwhile, a younger woman, maybe 20, strong-shouldered, her hair pulled back and tied with a strip of sinew, is working a hide. The hide is staked out on the ground, flesh side up, and she is scraping it with a tool made from a horse's shoulder blade, the broad flat bone honed to a working edge. The motion is long, firm, repetitive. Push, scrape, lift, reposition, push again. Curls of membrane and fat peel away from the skin, leaving it clean, smooth, pale. Later she will treat it with a paste of brains and fat, the natural tanning agents that break down the collagen fibers and make the leather soft and supple. Every animal, it turns out, carries enough brains to tan its own hide. There is a neatness to this that borders on poetic. The sound of the scraping is rhythmic. Shush, shush, shush. Like a broom on stone. Like the sea pulling back from sand. She has been working hide since she was a girl. Her hands know the resistance of fresh skin versus dried skin, the difference between a clean scrape and one that cuts too deep and thins the leather to the point of tearing. Her forearms are thick with muscle from this work, the specific asymmetrical strength of a person who performs the same demanding motion thousands of times a season. If you could see her hands, you would notice the calluses, hard ridges of thickened skin across the heel of each palm, built up layer by layer, the body's own armor against friction. Your hands build calluses too if you let them. From a guitar string, a barbell, a shovel, a pen held too tightly for too many hours. The mechanism is identical. Repeated pressure triggers keratinocyte production in the epidermis, thickening the outer layer of skin. Your body is still capable of adapting to physical work with the same elegant efficiency hers did. Just rarely gets the chance. And through all of this, the fish cooking, the flint napping, the hide scraping, the children observing, there is talk. Quiet, continuous, woven through the work like thread through cloth. Not formal speech. Not announcements or instructions. Just the murmur of people who have known each other their entire lives, talking about nothing and everything in the way that people do when they are comfortable and unhurried. A comment about the fish. A joke. Yes, jokes, because humor is as old as language and probably older. A question about the weather. A fragment of a story someone heard from a group they traded with last autumn, about a valley to the south where the bison herds are so thick you can smell them from a day's walk away. This is the social fabric. This is the technology that holds everything else together. Not the flint, not the fire, not the furs, but the talking. The endless, essential, unremarkable act of people sharing information in real time, updating each other's mental models, reinforcing bonds, resolving tensions, planning collectively without anyone calling a meeting. You do this too. Every conversation you have, at work, at dinner, on the phone with someone you love, is a continuation of this 40,000-year-old practice. The content has changed. The medium has changed. The underlying function has not changed one syllable. Rain begins. Light at first, a few drops hitting the stone overhang above, each one a tiny percussion, random, then gathering into a pattern, then becoming a curtain of sound that encloses the shelter in a soft roar. The fire hisses where stray drops find it. The air fills with the smell of wet stone, wet earth, wet hide. Everyone moves a little closer to the center. A child laughs at the rain. Someone pulls a fur over their head and pretends to be an animal, and the child laughs harder. This is not surviving. This is living. The rain stops sometime in the afternoon. The clouds thin, and for the first time all day, sunlight breaks through, low gold, slanting across the valley floor and turning the wet stones of the riverbank into something luminous. The air is warmer now, but not warm. The kind of temperature where you can feel the sun on one side of your face and the cold on the other, and your body doesn't know which season to believe. The hunters return. They left at mid-morning, 3 adults, moving fast and light, carrying spears and an atlatl, the lever-like device that extends the reach and velocity of a thrown spear beyond what the human arm alone can achieve. They followed the reindeer herd that had been grazing on the open steppe above the valley, tracking them by spoor and scent and the deep knowledge of how reindeer move when they're feeding versus when they're nervous versus when they're about to bolt. The hunt was successful. They carry a young reindeer between them, slung on a pole, its legs tied, its body still warm. The weight of it, maybe 150 pounds, is distributed across 3 sets of shoulders, and even so, the men are breathing hard, sweat cooling on their necks in the cold air. Their hands are bloody. The kill was clean. A single spear through the rib cage piercing the lungs, but the butchering was done in the field quickly before scavengers could arrive. The viscera were left for the ravens and the foxes. The liver was eaten raw on the spot, still hot, passed from hand to hand. This is not savagery. This is nutrition. Raw liver is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth, packed with iron, vitamin A, B12, folate. The body that has just spent 3 hours tracking and killing needs those nutrients immediately, and the hunters know this without knowing why they know it. The knowledge is in the craving. The body asks for what it needs. The return to camp changes the energy of the place. There is a quickening. The children run to see the animal. The woman by the fire begins to rearrange the cooking stones, building a larger fire, preparing for the work of processing an entire carcass. The cutting, the scraping, the drying, the rendering. Nothing will be wasted. The meat will be eaten fresh or dried for storage. The hide will be tanned. The sinew will be pulled from the back and legs and dried into cordage. The strongest natural fiber available, elastic, durable, essential for sewing, binding, and bowstrings. The bones will be cracked for marrow, then carved into tools, needles, ornaments. The antlers will become hammerheads, pressure flakers, handles. Even the stomach and bladder will be cleaned and used as containers. One animal, dozens of products, weeks of material. This is economy. Not the abstract, numerical economy of markets and currencies, but the original economy. The one that runs on attention, skill, and the absolute refusal to let anything go to waste. Every culture that has ever lived close to the land understands this economy, and every culture that has moved away from it has, in some fundamental way, forgotten what things cost. The butchering begins as the sun drops lower. The sounds of it are wet, precise. The crack of joints separating, the soft tearing of fascia, the scrape of flint on bone. Hands are red to the wrist. Steam rises from the open carcass into the cold air. The smell is overwhelming, blood and fat and the grassy, musky scent of the animal's stomach contents, the last meal it ever ate, now spilling out onto the ground. And then something happens that shifts everything. The old flint knapper, the man with the skilled hands and the aching joints, stands up from his work and walks to the edge of the overhang. He stands very still. He is looking out across the valley, but not at anything specific. He is listening. The wind has changed. It was blowing from the south all day, mild, damp, carrying the smell of rain and river. Now it has swung to the north, and the north wind is different. It is dry. It is cold in a way that the south wind was not. A deep, bone-level cold that presses against the face and finds every gap in clothing, every exposed inch of skin. And it carries a smell that the old man recognizes because he has smelled it before, in winters that came too early and stayed too long. The smell of glacial air. Clean, metallic, utterly empty of life. The smell of the ice sheet itself, breathing southward across the tundra, pushing cold air ahead of it like a tide. He has felt this before. Years ago, maybe 10 years, maybe 15, the count doesn't matter. The wind changed like this, and the winter that followed was savage. The herds moved south. The river froze so thick you could walk across it. 2 people in the group died. An infant, born too early, and an old woman whose cough turned wet and never dried. The cold didn't kill them directly. It killed the margins. It turned adequacy into insufficiency, turned enough food into almost enough food, turned shelter into not quite enough shelter. He turns back to the group. He doesn't shout. He doesn't command. He just speaks, quietly, to the woman by the fire, to the men still working the carcass. And what he says, though we will never know the words, amounts to this. The wind has changed. Winter is coming early. We need to prepare. No one argues. No one asks for evidence or data or a second opinion. The old man has been reading weather for 50 years. His body is a barometer. His memory is a climate record stretching back half a century. When he says the wind has changed, the group listens because the cost of ignoring him is not a bad quarterly report. The cost is death. The work accelerates. More meat is cut for drying. The smoking rack, a frame of green branches lashed together with sinew, is rebuilt and expanded. Hides are checked for tears. The sleeping area is rearranged, the furs piled thicker, the bedding pulled farther under the overhang and away from the exposed edge where the north wind will find it. Firewood is gathered, not casually, not a few armfuls, but seriously, systematically. The older children sent out in pairs to collect deadfall from the birch stand downstream, dragging back branches as thick as their arms. The camp transforms. Not in panic. In purpose. The difference is important. Panic is what happens when a threat arrives without warning. Purpose is what happens when a threat is recognized early and met with collective, coordinated action. These people are not panicking. They are preparing. And the preparation is so smooth, so practiced, so deeply embedded in the group's shared knowledge, that it looks almost casual. But it isn't casual. It is the product of 10,000 generations of people who prepared or died. The ones who didn't take the north wind seriously are not your ancestors. The ones who did, they're the reason you exist. Feel the air around you right now. Is it warm? Is it cool? Can you feel the faintest movement of air against your skin, the ventilation system in your building, or a draft from a window, or the slow circulation of air in a still room? Your skin is reading that air. Right now. The same nerve endings, the same thermoreceptors, the same ancient hardware that told the old man the wind had changed. You still have all of it. You just rarely need it anymore. The sun sets behind the hills. The light drains from the valley like water from a basin. The gold first, then the gray, then the blue, then the dark. The fire is the only light now, and it is large, larger than usual, fed generously against the cold that is already settling in, already pressing against the overhang like a living thing. The group draws close. The reindeer meat is cooking on the hot stones, thick slabs of it, sizzling, the fat rendering out and dripping onto the stone with a hiss that sounds like a whisper. The smell is extraordinary. Rich, savory, elemental. The smell of survival made tangible, made warm, made ready to eat. Someone begins to speak. Not about the wind, not about the preparation. A story. The voice is low, rhythmic, unhurried. The cadence of a narrative that has been told before and will be told again, shaped and reshaped with each telling, carrying information encoded in character and event and image because writing doesn't exist and memory is the only archive. The children lean in. The fire crackles. And the story, whatever it is, whoever it's about, whether it's a tale of a great hunt or a trickster spirit or a flood that swallowed a valley, the story does what stories have always done. It holds the group together. It turns a collection of individuals into a people. It takes the weight of the north wind and the fear of the coming cold and the grief of past losses and folds them into something bearable, something shared, something that can be carried. You are listening to a story right now, this one, and it's doing the same thing. The night deepens. The stars emerge, not the faint, scattered stars you see from a city, but the full, crushing weight of the Milky Way horizon to horizon, so dense with light it looks like smoke. The temperature drops. The fire is tended. The furs are pulled tight. And somewhere in the dark, the north wind settles in for the night, patient and cold and old beyond reckoning. But inside the circle of firelight, the people are warm. The story continues. The meat is shared. A child falls asleep with grease on her chin, curled against the body of someone who loves her. This is a day. One ordinary day 40,000 years ago. It held fear and joy and work and rest and food and cold and laughter and the smell of smoke and the sound of rain and the quiet miracle of people taking care of each other. Not so different from yours. Not so different at all. The north wind is still blowing. You can hear it, or imagine you can hear it, pressing against the world outside this story, the same way it pressed against that limestone overhang 40,000 years ago. Cold, dry, patient. Carrying the smell of ice from a sheet that stretched from Scandinavia to the English Channel, 2 miles thick in places, heavy enough to push the Earth's crust downward into the mantle like a thumb pressing into bread dough. That ice sheet is gone now. It melted. It took about 10,000 years to disappear, and as it went, it carved the fjords of Norway, gouged the Great Lakes of North America, scattered boulders across the English countryside that had been picked up in Scotland, and released enough water to raise global sea levels by roughly 400 feet. Coastlines that the people of our story walked on, the plains that connected Britain to France, the land bridges that linked Indonesia to mainland Asia, the vast Beringian steppe between Siberia and Alaska, all of it is underwater now, drowned. The map they knew is a sea floor. And yet, the climate is shifting again. Not in geological time. Not over millennia. In decades. You already know this. You've heard the numbers, seen the headlines, felt the particular modern anxiety that comes from knowing something enormous is happening and feeling powerless to stop it. The global average temperature has risen by roughly 1.2 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial era. The rate of warming is unprecedented in the paleoclimate record, faster than anything the ice cores show for at least the past 800,000 years. Arctic sea ice is declining. Permafrost is thawing. The jet stream is destabilizing, producing weather patterns that would have seemed impossible 2 generations ago. Heat domes, atmospheric rivers, polar vortex collapses that send Arctic air screaming south into latitudes where the infrastructure was never built to handle it. The old man in our story read the wind and knew what was coming. He had 50 years of embodied data, 50 winters felt in his bones, in his skin, in the particular ache of his joints when the pressure dropped. His body was his weather station and his memory was his climate model. We have better instruments. Satellites that measure ice thickness from orbit. Buoys that record ocean temperature at depth. Stations on every continent feeding data into models that can project, with increasing accuracy, what the next decade and the next century will look like. And the models say the wind has changed. This is not a lecture. I promised you no lectures and I meant it. But the echo is real and it deserves to be heard, not as a warning but as a recognition. The same species that faced a glacial advance 40,000 years ago is now facing a different kind of climate disruption, and the parallels are not metaphorical. They are structural. In both cases, the change is environmental. In both cases, it affects food systems, migration patterns, and the habitability of entire regions. In both cases, the people living through it did not cause it, or at least in the ancient case they certainly didn't. In both cases, the response that matters is not individual heroism but collective coordination. The old man didn't survive the hard winter alone. No one did. They survived it together or they didn't survive it at all. The fire shifts. A log collapses inward, sending a spray of sparks into the dark. The heat pulses outward and then steadies. There are other echoes, quieter ones that sit closer to the skin. Consider food. Not the philosophy of food, the reality of it. The woman in our story ate, on a typical day, somewhere between 40 and 80 different species of plants and animals over the course of a season. Roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, berries, leafy greens, fungi, insects, fish, birds, small game, large game. A rotating portfolio of nutrients so diverse that no single crop failure could starve her. Her diet was local by necessity, seasonal by definition, and varied beyond anything a modern nutritionist could design on purpose. Your great-grandmother probably ate food from a dozen or so species on any given day. You eat food from perhaps 4 or 5, and 3 of those are likely wheat, corn, and soy, reprocessed into 1,000 unrecognizable forms and flavored with sugar and salt to trick the same reward pathways that once fired when our ancestors found a beehive full of honey. The honey ran out. The processed food doesn't. And the body that was built to feast and fast, to gorge when food was abundant and burn reserves when it wasn't, never gets the fast. The feast is permanent. And a permanent feast, it turns out, is a different kind of starvation. A starvation of variety, of rhythm, of the stop signal that tells the body enough. The echoes go deeper still. Consider social fragmentation. Now think about loneliness. Not the romantic loneliness of a poet staring out a window, the clinical kind. The kind that epidemiologists now track the way they track smoking or obesity, because the data suggests it is comparably lethal. Social isolation increases the risk of premature death by 26%. It is associated with elevated cortisol, chronic inflammation, impaired immune function, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline. The U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory on loneliness in 2023, calling it an epidemic of loneliness. In the most connected civilization in history. In a world where you can video call someone on the other side of the planet in real time, where social media promises community at the tap of a finger, where the word friend has been redefined to include people you have never met and never will. Now think about the overhang. The 9 or 10 people sleeping under furs, their bodies pressed together, their breathing synchronized by proximity, their waking hours filled with face-to-face conversation, shared labor, collective meals, communal childcare, and the constant, uninterrupted physical presence of people who knew them completely. Not through a profile. Not through a curated feed. Through smell and touch and the sound of each other's coughs in the night. They could not have been lonely. The architecture of their lives made loneliness almost structurally impossible. They were never alone, not while working, not while eating, not while sleeping, not while grieving. Solitude, when it happened, was a choice, not a default. The default was togetherness. The default was a circle around a fire, shoulders almost touching, voices low, the warmth of the group indistinguishable from the warmth of the flames. Your nervous system was built for that circle. It was wired over hundreds of thousands of years to expect the constant presence of a small group of known individuals. The absence of that presence registers biologically as danger. Loneliness is not a feeling. It is an alarm. It is your body telling you that you are separated from the group, and that separated from the group, historically, you die. You are not weak for feeling lonely. You are not broken. You are accurately perceiving a mismatch between what your body expects and what your life provides. The rain starts again. Soft, distant, a whisper against the leaves and the stone. Let it fall. There is a term for what we've been circling. Evolutionary mismatch. It sounds clinical, academic, the kind of phrase you'd find in a journal abstract. But the thing it describes is intimate. It describes you. It describes the gap between the body you inherited and the world you inhabit. Your body is a Paleolithic instrument. It was engineered, slowly, across millions of years of selection, for a world that no longer exists. A world of variable food supply, intense physical activity, constant social contact, natural light cycles, silence, darkness, cold, heat, hunger, satiation, danger, and rest. A world where the stressors were acute and physical. A predator, a storm, a rival, and the recovery was immediate and communal. You faced the threat, your body flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. You fought or fled or froze, the threat passed, and then you sat by the fire with your people and your nervous system came back down. Now, think about your average Tuesday. You wake to an alarm, an artificial sound at an artificial hour, overriding the circadian rhythm that your hypothalamus has been trying to maintain against the onslaught of evening screen light that suppressed your melatonin production the night before. You eat food that your Paleolithic body has no evolutionary context for. Refined sugar, seed oils, ultra-processed grain products engineered by food scientists to trigger dopamine release patterns that mimic the reward signature of finding a honeycomb or a cache of ripe fruit, except the honeycomb ran out and the processed food never does. You sit 4 hours in a chair, at a desk, in a car, on a couch. Your musculoskeletal system, built for walking 10 to 15 miles a day over uneven terrain, for squatting, climbing, lifting, throwing, is folded into a position that compresses your hip flexors, shortens your hamstrings, rounds your thoracic spine, and sends a cascade of postural compensations through your entire kinetic chain. The ache in your lower back is not a defect. It is a message. Your body is telling you it was not built for this. And the stress. Here is where the mismatch cuts deepest. The cortisol system, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the ancient chemical cascade that prepares your body to face a physical threat, does not distinguish between a charging aurochs and an email from your boss. It does not know the difference between a blizzard and a mortgage payment. It responds to perceived threat with the same suite of hormones, the same elevation of heart rate, the same redirection of blood from the digestive system to the muscles, the same suppression of immune function and reproductive function and higher cognitive function. Because in the world it was built for, you didn't need to think clearly when you were about to be eaten. You needed to run. But you can't run from an email. You can't fight a mortgage. And the threat never fully resolves because the email is followed by another email, and the mortgage is followed by another payment, and the cortisol never fully clears, and the system that was designed for brief, intense spikes followed by deep recovery is instead running at a low, constant hum that never shuts off. This is chronic stress, and it is the defining pathology of modern life. It drives insomnia, because your body believes it is unsafe to sleep. It drives anxiety, because your threat detection system is permanently activated. It drives depression, because chronic cortisol exposure suppresses serotonin and dopamine production over time, flattening the very neurochemistry that makes life feel worth living. It drives inflammation, which drives cardiovascular disease, which is the leading cause of death in the industrialized world. And here is the thing I want you to sit with if you're still awake. The thing that matters more than any of the data. You are not failing. The exhaustion you feel is not a personal shortcoming. The anxiety is not a character flaw. The insomnia, the restlessness, the way your attention fragments into 100 shards when you try to focus on one thing, these are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something is wrong with the fit between you and the world you live in. You are a beautifully calibrated organism. You are running the most sophisticated software in the known universe. A brain that can imagine the future, remember the past, feel the suffering of a stranger, compose music, solve differential equations, and fall in love. And you are running that software in an environment it was never designed for. An environment of artificial light, processed food, physical stagnation, social fragmentation, information overload, and the relentless, ambient hum of a civilization that never turns off. You're not broken. You're a deep-sea fish in a shallow pond. You're a wolf in a studio apartment. You're a 40,000-year-old nervous system trying to make sense of a world that is 300 years old, at most, the blink of an eye in evolutionary time. Not nearly enough time for the hardware to catch up to the software update. Be patient with yourself. The woman by the fire would understand you better than you think. She would recognize the tension in your shoulders. She would know what it means. She would probably put her hand on your arm and say nothing, because sometimes nothing is the right thing to say and the hand is enough. There is one more mismatch worth naming. The one closest to where you are right now. Sleep. The people in the overhang slept when it was dark and woke when it was light. Not by discipline, by chemistry. When the sun set, the absence of blue spectrum light allowed their pineal glands to produce melatonin unimpeded. The hormone flooded their systems, softening the edges of consciousness, pulling them downward into sleep with the same gentle insistence that gravity pulls water downhill. They didn't have to try to sleep. They didn't need techniques or supplements or white noise machines. The darkness did the work. They slept in 2 phases. This is something most people don't know. Historical and anthropological evidence suggests that pre-industrial humans practiced segmented sleep. A first sleep of 3 or 4 hours, a period of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night, and then a second sleep until dawn. During that middle waking period, people tended the fire, talked softly, made love, nursed infants, or simply lay in the dark and thought. It was not insomnia. It was normal. It was the natural architecture of human sleep before artificial light compressed it into a single, anxious, 8-hour block that most people can't achieve anyway. If you wake at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark for an hour before falling back asleep, you're not malfunctioning. You're doing something ancient. Something your body may actually prefer if you'd let it. And then there is attention. The final mismatch, the one that hums beneath all the others like a bass note. The human attention system evolved in an environment where new information arrived slowly. A sound in the forest, a change in the weather, a stranger at the edge of camp. Each event was discrete, separated from the next by minutes or hours or days of relative sameness. The brain had time to process each input fully, to assess, respond, integrate, and return to baseline before the next input arrived. Now consider your phone. Consider the average scroll through a social media feed, an image every 2 seconds, each one engineered to provoke an emotional response, each one demanding a micro-decision, like ignore, respond, save, share, judge. Hundreds of inputs per minute, each one triggering the same novelty detection circuits that once fired when a twig snapped in the dark. Your brain treats each notification the way it once treated the sound of a predator, a momentary hijack of attention, a spike of arousal, a tiny shot of dopamine followed by a tiny crash. Repeat, 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 hundreds of times a day. The exhaustion you feel at the end of a day spent mostly sitting is not laziness. It is depletion. Your attention system has been sprinting all day and it was built for a walk. The wind dies down, just for a moment. A pocket of stillness like the space between breaths. Hold it. Now, before the quiet takes you all the way down, before the weight of mismatch and loneliness and the north wind settles too heavy on your chest, let me tell you the other half of the story. The half that matters more. You survived. Not you personally, though you did, and we'll get to that. The species. Humanity. The people in the overhang. The people who read the wind and stacked the firewood and dried the meat and told stories through the longest nights. They survived. They survived the ice ages. Not one, dozens. Glacial cycles that lasted tens of thousands of years, that buried half the northern hemisphere under ice, that turned forests into tundra and rivers into glaciers and pushed entire ecosystems hundreds of miles south. They survived them all. Not with technology as we understand it, not with central heating or insulated walls or supply chains. With knowledge, with cooperation, with the ability to look at the person beside them and say, in whatever language they spoke, we will get through this together. They survived the Toba catastrophe, if the theory holds. Roughly 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in present-day Sumatra erupted with a force that makes every modern eruption look like a kitchen match. It blanketed South Asia in ash. It may have triggered a volcanic winter that lasted years, a dimming of sunlight, a collapse of plant growth, a cascade failure through the food web that brought the human population to perhaps as few as a few thousand breeding pairs. The genetic evidence for this bottleneck is debated, contested, reanalyzed with every new sequencing technique. But the fact remains, at some point in our deep past, the species was reduced to a thread, a whisper, A handful of people in a handful of places holding on, and the thread held. Think about that. Every human alive today, all 8 billion of us in every city, every village, every high-rise apartment and mud-walled hut and suburban split level, descends from that thread. From the ones who didn't give up. From the ones who kept the fire going through the volcanic winter. From the ones who fed their children first and ate last and walked another mile when their legs said stop. That stubbornness is in you. That refusal to quit. It is not a motivational poster. It is a biological fact. You are the living proof that it works. Consider what was required. Not just physical toughness, though that was part of it. What was required was the ability to transmit knowledge across time. To take what one generation learned and pass it, intact and usable, to the next. This is the trick. This is the thing that separates us from every other species that has ever lived on this planet. Other animals learn. Other animals teach in rudimentary ways. A mother otter showing her pup how to crack a shell. A meerkat teaching its young which scorpions are safe to eat. But no other species transmits cumulative culture. Knowledge that builds on itself, generation after generation. Growing in complexity and scope until a descendant can do things the original innovator never imagined. The woman who first figured out how to keep a fire alive through the night couldn't have imagined a sewing needle carved from bone. The person who invented the needle couldn't have imagined a tailored fursuit that allowed humans to walk into the Arctic. The person who wore that suit into the Arctic couldn't have imagined a boat that crossed open ocean. But each innovation was built on the last, like floors in a building, and the building is still rising, and you are standing on the top floor, and the view from here is only possible because of every floor beneath you. This is cultural ratchet. Each generation tightens the mechanism one click further, and it never slips back. The knowledge persists. The skills compound. The building grows. And the mortar that holds it all together, the thing that keeps the floors from collapsing, is storytelling. Not fiction specifically, though fiction is part of it. Storytelling in the broadest sense. The encoding of information into narrative form so that it can be remembered, repeated, and transmitted without writing, without recording, without any technology other than a human voice and a human ear. The old man's knowledge of the wind was a story, not one he told in words necessarily, but one his body told through gesture and decision. The fish trap in the river was a story, a design narrative passed from parent to child, refined and adapted over centuries, carrying within its woven branches the accumulated wisdom of every fisherman who had ever watched a trout swim into a funnel and failed to find its way out. Stories are survival technology. They always have been. The story you're listening to right now is the same technology, repurposed but not redesigned. The medium has changed, from firelight to screen light, from voice to text, from a circle of 9 to an audience of thousands. But the function is the same. To compress experience into a form that can be carried. To make the past portable. To turn data into something the heart can hold. And here is what carried them through. Not strength, though they were strong. Not intelligence, though they were brilliant. The thing that saved them every single time was the same thing. The fire. The circle. The group. Humans are not the strongest primate. We are not the fastest. We do not have the best night vision, the sharpest claws, the thickest skin. In a one-on-one confrontation with most large predators, a human being is fatally outmatched. What we have, what we've always had, is each other. Cooperative breeding. Shared childcare. Division of labor. Collective hunting. The ability to teach, to learn, to transmit complex information across generations through language and demonstration. The ability to grieve together, to celebrate together, to sit in silence together when the words run out and just be in each other's presence, which is sometimes the most useful thing a person can do. Anthropologists call it alloparenting, the practice of raising children communally, distributing the burden of care across the entire group rather than loading it onto one or two individuals. In hunter-gatherer societies studied in the 20th century, a child might be nursed by its mother but carried by its aunt, watched by its grandmother, fed by its uncle, and taught by whichever adult happened to be doing something interesting that day. The child was never alone. The mother was never alone. The labor of keeping a small human alive, which is, by any honest accounting, the most exhausting and important work a mammal can do, was shared. Compare this to the modern expectation. Two parents, often one in a sealed dwelling, managing the full weight of childcare with minimal outside support while simultaneously maintaining employment, domestic order, and some fragile approximation of personal identity. The exhaustion of modern parenting is not a failure of effort. It is a failure of architecture. You are trying to do with two hands what was designed to be done by 20. This is not sentimentality. This is survival strategy. The anthropological record is clear. The groups that cooperated outsurvived the individuals who didn't. The ones who shared food lived longer than the ones who hoarded it. The ones who cared for the sick and the elderly preserved the knowledge that kept the group alive. Because the old man who reads the wind is useless when he's healthy and strong, but he's invaluable when his body fails and his mind doesn't, and the group that throws him away has thrown away its own memory. We are a cooperative species. We are built for each other. Every impulse you have to help, to hold a door, to check on a neighbor, to sit with a friend who's struggling, to share food with a stranger, is not naive. It is ancient. It is the same impulse that kept the fire going through the ice ages, that kept the circle intact when the wind blew hardest, that carried the species from a few thousand survivors in Africa to every corner of the habitable earth. And it is still in you, right now, tonight, even in the shallow pond, even in the studio apartment, even in the world of screens and processed food and chronic cortisol and the relentless hum of a civilization that never, ever turns off. Even there, especially there. The capacity for connection, for cooperation, for the simple, radical act of being present with another human being, it has not been bred out of you. It has not been overwritten. It is not obsolete. It is the most current technology you possess. A coal in the fire splits with a sound like a whispered word. The heat flares for a moment, then settles. Somewhere outside the overhang, outside the story, outside whatever room you're in, the world continues. The wind blows. The ice advances or retreats depending on which millennium you're standing in. The stars shift in their slow, indifferent arcs. But here in the circle, in the warmth, it's enough. The woman checks her child's forehead one more time before she sleeps. The fever is down. The cough is quieter. The worst may have passed. She doesn't know the word for antibody. She doesn't know that her child's immune system has just fought and won a battle involving billions of cells, each one carrying the same DNA, the same ancient instructions, the same refusal to give up that has characterized the species since before it was a species. She just knows the forehead is cooler. And that is enough. She pulls the fur up over the child's shoulders. Presses her lips to the top of the child's head, that warm, slightly sour, entirely beloved smell of a child's hair. And she closes her eyes. Tomorrow there will be more wood to gather, more meat to dry. The wind from the north will still be blowing, and the preparations will continue, and the work will be hard and the cold will be real and nothing about any of it will be easy. But the fire will be here, and the people will be here, and the story will continue. That has always been enough. Let the fire burn lower now. Not out, just lower. Let the flames shrink to a blue-gold murmur at the base of the logs. Let the coals do the work. Let the light pull inward until the circle is small and close and the darkness beyond it is total. That's where we are now, near the end. Near the place where the story lets go of you and you let go of the story, and whatever is left is just warmth and quiet and the slow pulse of your own breathing. But before we get there, one more thing. One more way of seeing. Imagine a clock. A 24-hour clock. The kind with a single hand that makes one full rotation from midnight to midnight. And on that clock compress the entire history of the Earth. All 4.5 billion years of it. One revolution. 24 hours. At midnight the Earth forms. A ball of molten rock and gas, accreting from the debris of a dead star, too hot to touch, too violent to look at, glowing like a coal in the black void. For the first several hours, billions of years, nothing lives. The surface cools. Oceans condense from the steam of volcanic outgassing. The atmosphere is poison. Methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, no free oxygen. The planet is alive in the geological sense. Plates shifting, volcanoes erupting, the magnetic field stuttering into existence. But biologically, it is empty. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, roughly 3.8 billion years ago, the first life appears. Single cells. Bacteria. Organisms so simple they make a virus look complex, yet each one containing the same basic machinery that runs every cell in your body tonight. DNA, RNA, protein synthesis, membrane transport. The code was written in that first hour of life, and it has never been rewritten. Only edited. Only expanded. The same operating system running without interruption for nearly 4 billion years. For the next 16 hours of the clock, 16 hours representing more than 3 billion years, life remains single-celled. Bacteria. Archaea. Algae eventually, which learn the trick of photosynthesis and begin, impossibly slowly, to poison the atmosphere with oxygen. This is the longest chapter. The most patient chapter. If you were watching the clock during those 16 hours, you would see almost nothing change. Just water and rock and microbes and time. And yet everything was changing. Beneath the surface, in the warm shallows of an ocean that had no name, single cells were solving problems that would make a modern engineer weep with envy. How to harvest energy from sunlight. How to repair damaged DNA. How to communicate chemically with neighboring cells. How to merge, one cell swallowing another and learning to live together, the swallowed cell becoming the mitochondrion, the tiny engine that powers every cell in your body right now, carrying its own separate DNA, its own ancient identity, a passenger that became a partner roughly 2 billion years ago and has never left. Every breath you take tonight feeds those mitochondria. Every molecule of ADP that keeps your heart beating and your neurons firing is produced by an organelle that was once a free-living bacterium. You are not a single organism. You are a collaboration. A consortium of ancient lives that learned to cooperate so effectively that they forgot they were ever separate. Around 8:30 in the evening, roughly 550 million years ago, multicellular life explodes. The Cambrian explosion. Suddenly, in geological terms, there are bodies. As shells. Predators and prey. The ocean fills with forms so strange they look like the fevered dreams of a surrealist painter. Five-eyed creatures, armored worms, swimming mouths with no discernible brain. In the space of a few minutes on the clock, life goes from invisible to spectacle. By 9 in the evening, fish have evolved. By 9:30, the first animals crawl onto land, their fins becoming limbs, their swim bladders becoming lungs, their bodies learning to negotiate gravity in a medium that does not hold them up. Amphibians. Then reptiles. Then around 10 p.m. dinosaurs. They dominate for what feels like an entire hour of the clock, roughly 165 million years. They are here so long that they feel permanent. They feel like the point of the story. They are not the point of the story. At roughly 11:39 p.m., an asteroid 6 miles wide hits the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact releases energy equivalent to 10 billion nuclear weapons. The sky burns. The oceans boil at the coasts. The dust cloud blocks sunlight for months. The dinosaurs and 75% of all species on Earth are gone. And in the silence that follows, in the empty niches, the cooling ash, the slow return of sunlight, small, warm-blooded, furry creatures emerge from their burrows. They blink at a world that has been cleared for them. Mammals, your ancestors. Not yet primates. Not yet human. Just small, adaptable, warm, and alive. The first primates appear around 11:45 p.m. The first hominins, the lineage that leads to humans, appear around 11:58. 2 minutes to midnight. Homo sapiens, your species, the woman by the fire, the old man reading the wind, appears at roughly 11:59 and 56 seconds. For seconds before midnight. 300,000 years, compressed into 4 ticks of the clock. And everything you have ever learned in a history class. Every pharaoh, every empire, every war, every revolution, every symphony, every novel, every moonwalk, and every massacre. All of it happens in the final fraction of the final second. A sliver of time so thin that if the clock hand were a razor blade, recorded human civilization would be thinner than the edge. Let that settle. Not as an argument. Not as a lesson. Just as a fact held gently, the way you might hold a stone you found by a river. Smooth, heavy, cool in the palm, interesting to turn over but not demanding anything of you. Your life is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that final second. And yet here you are. Conscious. Aware. Listening to a story about people who lived 40,000 years ago, which is itself barely a heartbeat on the clock, and feeling something. Curiosity maybe. Sadness. Wonder. The faint, pleasant vertigo of looking down into deep time and seeing, far below, the reflection of your own face looking back up. You are brief. You are temporary. You are a spark thrown from the fire that has been burning since 4 in the morning on the clock of the earth. And that is not a diminishment. That is a release. Because here is what the long view gives you if you let it. Not insignificance, perspective. The understanding that you are part of something so much larger than your own life that your own life doesn't need to carry the weight of the whole. You don't need to solve the species. You don't need to save the planet by yourself. You don't need to justify your existence with productivity or achievement or some measurable return on the investment of your birth. You just need to do what every organism in the 4 billion year history of life on Earth has done. Live. For a while. As well as you can. And then pass something on. A gene, a story, a kindness, a skill, a memory, a fire that someone else can tend when your hands are too tired to hold the wood. The woman in the overhang didn't know she was part of a 4 billion year story. She didn't need to know. She just needed to keep the fire going through the night. And she did. And here we are. The weight you carry, the worry, the planning, the guilt, the ambition, the fear that you are not doing enough, not being enough, not living correctly, all of it sits within that fraction of a second. It is real. It matters to you, and because it matters to you, it matters. But it is also, in the longest view, a single breath in a conversation that has been going on for 4.5 billion years and will continue long after the breath is finished. You don't have to solve everything tonight. The earth will still be turning in the morning. The story will still be unfolding. You are a participant, not the author. And participants are allowed to rest. The coals pulse. Orange, then dim, then orange again. The rhythm of a heartbeat, if heartbeats were made of light. Here is something worth sitting with in the dark. You almost didn't happen. Not in the vague, philosophical sense. In the precise, mathematical, vertiginous sense. The chain of events that led to you, to this specific configuration of atoms reading these specific words at this specific moment, is so improbable that probability itself seems like the wrong framework. It is not unlikely that you exist. It is, by any reasonable calculation, essentially impossible. And yet, start with the woman by the fire. She had 3 living children. In a world without antibiotics, without sterile surgery, without prenatal vitamins or ultrasound or neonatal intensive care, getting 3 children to survive past infancy was not a given. It was an achievement. Each of those children represents a gauntlet run, the gauntlet of birth in a rock shelter, of childhood illness without medicine, of nutrition dependent entirely on the skill and luck of the group, of injury in a world where a broken bone can be a death sentence. One of those children grew up, found a partner, had children of their own. And one of those children survived and found a partner and had children. And so on. And so on. For 2,000 generations. 2,000 generations. Each one a link in a chain that, if broken at any single point, would have erased you from the future as completely as if you had never been conceived. Every ancestor who survived a famine. Every ancestor who outran a predator. Every ancestor who recovered from a fever or found water in a drought, or made the right decision at the right moment, to turn left instead of right, to cross the river here instead of there, to trust this stranger, to flee this danger. Every one of those decisions led to the next generation, which led to the next, which led, eventually, impossibly, to you. Think about the numbers. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents. Go back 20 generations, roughly 500 years, and you have over 1 million direct ancestors. Go back 40 generations and the number exceeds 1 trillion, which is more people than have ever lived, which means your family tree is not a tree at all but a web, a tangle, a braid of bloodlines crossing and recrossing and converging until the entire population of a region is, in some sense, one family. Go back 2,000 generations, to the overhang, to the fire, to the woman with the aching molar, and the web encompasses the species. You are related to everyone who has ever lived. Not distantly, directly. The mathematics of ancestry guarantee it. By the time you reach back far enough, every human alive today shares common ancestors with every other human alive today. The branches all converge. The river flows back to a single source. And it's not just the surviving that was improbable. It's the meeting. Every partnership in your ancestral line required 2 specific people to be in the same place at the same time. The hunter who wandered into a neighboring group's territory during a seasonal gathering. The woman who left her birth group to join another band, a practice called exogamy, common in hunter-gatherer societies, a small act of bravery that reshuffled the genetic deck and kept the population healthy. The 2 strangers who looked at each other across a shared fire and felt something. Attraction, curiosity, the ancient pull of compatible immune systems detected through scent, through pheromones, through the unconscious chemistry that still makes you lean toward some people and away from others for reasons you can never quite articulate. If any one of those meetings had not happened, if the hunter had turned left instead of right, if the woman had stayed with her birth group, if the weather had been different on that one particular day, the chain would have branched differently, and someone else would exist in your place and you would be nowhere. Not dead. Not unborn. Simply never conceived. A possibility that never collapsed into a person. But it did collapse. Every meeting happened. Every unlikely pairing produced a child, and the child survived, and here you are. You are the product of a conspiracy of survival so vast and so ancient that it makes every other achievement in human history look like a footnote. The pyramids took 20 years to build. The chain that built you took 300,000. And at no point in that chain did anyone know you were coming. The woman by the fire did not know that 40,000 years later, someone would be lying in the dark, listening to a story about her, feeling a connection across time that she could not have imagined. She didn't do what she did for you. She did it for the child in front of her, the one with the fever, the one whose forehead was finally cooling. She did it for the morning. She did it because the fire needed tending and the traps needed checking and the north wind was blowing and there was work to do. But the result of her work, the downstream consequence of every fire she tended, every hide she scraped, every child she fed and held and kept alive through one more winter, is you. You are the result. You are the return on her investment. You are the harvest of a crop she planted without knowing what would grow. There is a word for the feeling this should produce, and the word is gratitude, but the feeling is bigger than the word. The feeling is more like awe, the quiet, humbling, slightly terrifying recognition that you are the beneficiary of an unbroken chain of love and labor and stubbornness and luck stretching back to the Pleistocene and beyond, and that the only appropriate response is to sit with it for a moment and let it be real. So let it be real. You are here. You are alive. You are breathing air that contains oxygen produced by organisms that have been photosynthesizing for 3 billion years. You are warm, either by fire or by furnace. The principle is the same. Combustion, the ancient exothermic reaction that has been keeping primates alive since the first hominins learned to control it. You are safe, or safe enough for now, for tonight, for this moment. And you are not alone even if the room is empty. Because the people who made you are in you. Their calcium is in your bones. Their iron is in your blood. Their stubbornness is in the set of your jaw when you refuse to quit on a hard day. You carry them. They carried you. The carrying goes in both directions across time, like the river flowing downstream and the salmon fighting upstream, two currents in the same water, each one essential, each one continuous, each one older than memory. A long silence. The fire makes no sound now. Just heat. Just light. Just the faintest glow of coals that have given everything they have and are ready to become ash. So, here we are. The end of the story, or at least the end of tonight's telling. The fire has burned down to almost nothing. The coals are gray at the edges, deep red at the center, like the last light of a sunset seen from a great distance. The overhang is quiet. The children are asleep. The old man is asleep, his hand still curled in the shape of the flint tool he was holding when he closed his eyes. The hunters are asleep, their muscles warm and heavy with the day's work, their bodies repairing themselves in the dark the way bodies have always repaired themselves, silently, automatically, without needing to be asked. The woman is the last one awake. She always is. She sits by the fire, not feeding it now, just watching it. The coals shift. A tiny collapse, a miniature avalanche of ash and ember, and then stillness. The heat is still there, enough to warm her hands, enough to warm her face, but it is fading. By morning she will need to coax it back. She has done this 1,000 times. She will do it 1,000 more. She is tired. Not the frantic, wired, eyes won't close exhaustion you know. The other kind. The deep kind. The kind that comes from a day of useful work, of food earned and shared, of problems met and handled, of a child's fever breaking, of the north wind acknowledged and prepared for. The tiredness of a body that has been fully used and is ready to be fully still. She lies down, pulls the bison fur up to her chin. The weight of it is a comfort, heavy, warm, smelling of smoke and animal and the particular human smell of a family that sleeps together. The child beside her stirs, presses closer and goes still again. The small hand rests on her arm. She covers it with her own. The stars are out. She can see them from the edge of the overhang, a river of light pouring across the sky, so thick and bright it seems impossible, seems like it should make a sound, a hiss or a hum, the white noise of the universe turning. But it makes no sound. It is silent. And the silence is not empty. It is full of distance, full of time, full of light that left its source thousands of years ago and is only now arriving at her eyes, which are closing, which are heavy, which are done. She sleeps. And somewhere, right now, tonight, in a room that she could not imagine, in a world that would seem to her like a dream or a hallucination, or a story told by someone who had eaten the wrong mushroom, you are lying in the dark too. Your eyes are closed or closing. Your breathing has slowed. The muscles in your face have softened. The jaw, the forehead, the tiny muscles around your eyes that hold tension you don't even know you're carrying. Let them soften further. Let the weight of the day slide off your shoulders the way the bison fur slides off hers when she turns in the night. You have been here before. Not in this room, in this state. This edge between waking and sleep, this threshold, this doorway that you pass through every night without thinking about it. It is the oldest doorway. Every human who has ever lived has passed through it. Every ancestor in your long, improbable chain of survival has closed their eyes at the end of a day and crossed this same border into the dark. You share this with them. This is the thing you share most intimately, more than DNA, more than bone structure, more than the shape of your teeth or the curve of your spine. You share the surrender. The nightly act of letting go, of trusting the dark, of releasing consciousness into the keeping of a body that knows how to breathe without being told, knows how to beat a heart without being asked, knows how to repair and replenish and dream without any instruction from the waking mind. Your body knows how to do this. It has been doing it for 300,000 years. Trust it. Thank you for being here tonight. I mean that. You had 1,000 things you could have done with this time, this hour, these minutes, this particular slice of your one brief life, and you spent it here in the dark with a story about a woman and a fire and a wind from the north. That means something. Not a lot, maybe, but something. And something is not nothing. If you're still awake, barely on the edge, 1 foot already through the doorway, thank you for staying. If you've already gone, if you drifted off somewhere between the ice cores and the foxtooth pendant, between the reindeer and the stars, that's perfect. That's what this was for. Sleep is not a failure of attention. It is the highest compliment you can pay a story, that it made you feel safe enough to let go. If you want to leave something behind before you go, a thought, a place, a time zone, a worry you're ready to set down, the comments are open. Someone will read it. Someone on the other side of the world, awake when you're asleep, listening to this same fire, feeling this same old human pull toward rest. You're not alone in this. You never have been. Subscribe if you'd like to come back. We'll be here. Same fire. Different story. Every week until the fire goes out, and it hasn't gone out yet. Not in 40,000 years. Not tonight. No. The overhang is quiet. The valley is dark. The river is still talking to the stones, but quieter now, like a conversation winding down at the end of a long evening, the words getting softer, the pauses getting longer, until the words and the pauses become the same thing. The woman sleeps. The children sleep. The old man sleeps, dreaming of summers he lived through decades ago, the warmth of them still stored somewhere in his bones. The wolves on the edge of the firelight have curled into crescents of fur, noses tucked under tails, breathing the slow breath of animals who have decided that tonight, this place, these people are safe enough. The fire glows. The stars turn. The wind from the north blows on, steady and cold and ancient, carrying the smell of ice and distance and the long, slow patience of a planet that has been doing this, turning, cooling, warming, turning again, for 4.5 billion years and is in no hurry to stop. You are a descendant of survivors. Every single one of them made it through the night. Every single one of them woke up in the morning, tended the fire, and kept going. You will too. Rest now. The story will be here when you wake. And tomorrow the fire gets fed again. Good night.